Instruction vouchsafed by the Heavenly Queen and Lady. My daughter, my object in revealing to thee in this history so many sacraments and secrets, both those which thou hast written and many others which thou art unable to manifest, is, that thou use them as a mirror of my life and as an inviolable rule of action for thy own. All of them should be engraven in the tablets of thy heart, and I recall to thy mind the teachings of eternal life, thereby complying with my duty as thy teacher. Be ready to obey and fulfill all commands as a willing and careful pupil. Let the humble care and watchfulness of my spouse, Saint Joseph, his submission to divine direction, and his esteem for heavenly enlightenment serve thee as an example. For only because his heart had been well disposed and prepared for the execution of the divine will was he entirely changed and remodeled by the plenitude of grace for the ministry assigned to him by the Most High. Let, therefore, the consciousness of thy faults serve thee as a motive to submit in all humility to the work of God, not as a pretext to withdraw from the performance of that which the Lord desires of thee. However, I wish on this occasion to reveal to thee the just reproach and indignation of the Most High against mortals, so that, comparing the conduct of other men with the humility and meekness which I exercise toward my spouse Saint Joseph, thou mayest understand it better in divine enlightenment. The cause of this reproach, which the Lord and I have to make against men, is the inhuman perversity of men in persisting to treat each other with so much want of humility and love. In this they commit 3 faults, which displease the Most High very much, and which cause the Almighty and me to withhold many mercies. The first is, that men, knowing that they are all children of the same Father in heaven, Isaiah 64:8, works of his hands, formed of the same nature, graciously nourished and kept alive by his providence, reared at the same table of divine mysteries and sacraments, especially of his own body and blood, nevertheless forget and despise all these advantages, concentrating all their interests upon earthly and trivial affairs, exciting themselves without reason, swelling with indignation, creating discords, quarrels, indulging in detractions and harsh words, sometimes rising up to most wicked and inhuman vengeance or mortal hate of one another. The second is that when through human frailty and want of mortification, incited by the temptation of the devil, they happen to fall into one of these faults, they do not at once seek to rid themselves of it, nor strive to be again reconciled, as should be done by brothers in the presence of a just judge. Thus they deny him as their merciful Father, force him to become the severe and rigid judge of their sins, for no faults excite him sooner to exercise his severity than the sins of revenge and hate. The third offense, which causes his great indignation, is that sometimes, when a brother comes in order to be reconciled, he that deems himself offended will not receive him, and asks a greater satisfaction than that which he knows would be accepted by the Lord, and which he himself offers as satisfaction to God's majesty. For all of them wish that God, who is most grievously offended, should receive and pardon them whenever they approach him with humility and contrition, while those that are but dust and ashes ask to be revenged upon their brothers, and will not content themselves with the satisfaction which the Most High himself readily accepts for their own sins. Of all the sins which the sons of the Church commit, none is more horrible than these in the eyes of the Most High. This thou wilt readily understand by the divine light and in the vigor of God's law, which commands men to pardon their brethren, although they may have offended 70 times 7. And if a brother offend many times every day, as soon as he says that he is sorry for it, the Lord commands us to forgive the offending brother as many times without counting the number. And those that are not willing to forgive, he threatens with severest punishment on account of the scandal which they cause. This can be gathered from the threatening words of God himself. Woe to him from whom scandal comes and through whom scandal is caused. It were better for him if he fell into the depths of the sea with a heavy millstone around his neck. This was said in order to indicate the danger of this sin and the difficulty of obtaining deliverance therefrom, which must be compared to that of a man dropping into the sea with a grinding stone around his neck. It also points out that the punishment is the abyss of eternal pains. Matthew 18:9. Therefore, the command of my most holy Son is good advice to the faithful, that they rather permit their eyes to be torn out and their hands chopped off than allow themselves to fall into this crime of scandalizing the little ones. O my dearest daughter, how thou must bewail the wickedness and evils of this sin with tears of blood. That is the sin which grieves the Holy Ghost, Ephesians 4:30, affords proud triumphs to the demons, makes monsters of rational creatures, and wipes out in them the image of the eternal Father. What thing more unbecoming or hateful and monstrous than to see creatures of the earth, the food of worms and corruption, rise up against one another in pride and arrogance? Thou wilt not find words strong enough to describe this wickedness, in order to persuade mortals to fear it and guard against the wrath of the Lord. Matthew 3:7. But do thou, dearest, preserve thy heart from this contagion. Stamp and engrave in it the most useful doctrine for thy guidance. Never think for a moment that in offending thy neighbor or scandalizing him in this way, the guilt can be small, for all these sins are weighty in the sight of God. Place a damper on all thy faculties and feelings in order to observe most strictly the rules of charity toward all creatures of the Most High. To me also afford this pleasure, since I wish thee to be most perfect in this virtue. I impose upon thee as my most vigorous precept, that thou give offense neither in thought, word, or deed to any of thy neighbors, and that thou prevent any of thy subjects, and, as far as thou canst, any other person in thy presence from injuring their neighbor. Meditate well on this, as I ask it of thee, my dearest, for it is a doctrine most divine, and least understood by mortals. Serve thyself with the only remedy against these passions, namely, with the compelling example of my humility and meekness, the effect of this sincere love not only toward my spouse, but toward all the children of the Heavenly Father, for I esteemed them and looked upon them as redeemed and bought for a great price. 1 Peter 1:18. With true fidelity and ingenious charity watch over thy religious. The divine majesty is offended grievously by anyone who does not fulfill this command expressly inculcated and called a new one by my Son, John 15:12. But he is roused to incomparably greater indignation against religious persons who offend against it. Among these are many who should distinguish themselves as perfect children of the Father and teacher of this virtue. Nevertheless, they cast it aside and thereby become more odious and detestable in his sight than worldly persons. Saint Joseph resolves to devote himself entirely to the service of Most Holy Mary. The behavior of Her Majesty and other particulars of the life of Mary and Joseph. The most faithful Joseph, after being informed of the mystery and sacrament of the Incarnation, was filled with such high and befitting sentiments concerning his spouse that, although he had always been holy and perfect, he was changed into a new man. He resolved to act toward the Heavenly Lady according to a new rule and with much greater reverence, as I will relate further on. This was conformable to the wisdom of the saint, and due to the excellence of his spouse. For Saint Joseph, by heavenly enlightenment, saw well that he was the servant, and she the mistress of heaven and earth. In order to satisfy his desire for honoring and reverencing her as the Mother of God, whenever he passed her or spoke to her alone, he did it with great external veneration and on bended knees. He would not allow her to serve him, or wait upon him, or perform any other humble services, such as cleaning the house or washing the dishes and the like. All these things the most happy spouse wished to do himself, in order not to derogate from the dignity of the Queen. But the Heavenly Lady, who among the humble was the most humble, and whom no one could surpass in humility, so managed all these things that the palm of victory in all these virtues always remained with her. She besought Saint Joseph not to bend the knees to her, for though this worship was due to the Lord, whom she carried in her womb, yet as long as he was within unseen by any one, no distinction was externally manifest between his and her own person. The saint therefore allowed himself to be persuaded and conformed to the wishes of the Queen of Heaven. Only at times, when she was not looking, he continued to give this worship to the Lord, whom she bore in her womb, and also to her as his mother, intending thereby to honor both according to the excellence of each. In regard to the other works and services, an humble contention arose between them, for Saint Joseph could not overcome his conviction as to the impropriety of allowing the great Queen and Lady to perform them, and therefore he sought to be beforehand with such household duties. His heavenly spouse was filled with the same eagerness to seize upon occasions in advance of Saint Joseph. As, however, he busied himself in these duties during the time which he spent in contemplation, he frustrated her continual desire of serving him and of performing all the duties of the household, which she considered as belonging to her as a servant. In her affliction on this account, the heavenly lady turned to the Lord with humble complaints and besought him to oblige Saint Joseph not to hinder her in the exercise of her humility as she desired. As this virtue is so powerful before the divine tribunal and has free access, no prayer accompanied by it is small. Humility makes all prayers effective and inclines the immutable being of God to clemency. He heard her petition, and he ordered the angel guardian of the blessed husband to instruct him as follows, quote, "Do not frustrate the humble desires of her who is supreme over all the creatures of heaven and earth. Exteriorly allow her to serve thee, and interiorly treat her with highest reverence, and at all times and in all places worship the incarnate Word. It is his will, equally with that of the Heavenly Mother, to serve and not to be served, in order to teach the world the knowledge of life and the excellence of humility. In some of the work thou canst assist her, but always reverence in her the Lord of all creation." Unquote. Instructed by this command of the Most High, Saint Joseph permitted the heavenly princess to exercise her humility, and so both of them were enabled to make an offering of their will to God. Most Holy Mary, by exercising the deepest humility and obedience toward her spouse in all her acts of virtue, which she performed without failing in the least point of perfection, and Saint Joseph by obeying the Almighty with a holy and prudent embarrassment, which was occasioned by seeing himself waited upon and served by her, whom he had recognized as his mistress and that of the world, and as the mother of his God and Creator. In this manner the prudent saint made up for the humility which he could not practice in the works now consigned to his spouse. This arrangement seemed to humiliate him more and filled him with a greater reverential fear. In this fear he observed Most Holy Mary, always bearing in mind the treasure of her virginal womb and adoring, magnifying, and praising the Lord. A few times, in reward of his holiness and reverence, or for the increase of both, the infant God manifested himself to him in a wonderful manner. He saw him in the womb of his purest mother, enclosed, as it were, in the clearest crystal. The sovereign queen conversed with the glorious saint concerning the incarnation, because she did not need to be so reserved in her heavenly words, since he had been enlightened and instructed in the sublime sacraments of the hypostatic union of the divine and human natures in the virginal chamber of his spouse. No human tongue can reproduce the celestial words and conversations of the Most Holy Mary and the blessed Joseph. I will adduce some of them in the following chapters as far as I know how. Yet who can declare the effects wrought in the sweet and devout heart of this saint in seeing himself not only constituted the husband of her who was the true mother of his Creator, but in finding himself also served by her as if she was the humblest slave, while at the same time he beheld her raised in sanctity and dignity above the highest seraphim and inferior only to God. If the divine right hand enriched with blessings the house of Obededom, for having sheltered for a few months the figurative ark of the Old Testament, what blessings did he not shower upon Saint Joseph, to whom he entrusted the true ark and the lawgiver himself enshrined in her? Incomparable was the good fortune and happiness of this saint, not only because he had with him in his house the living and true ark of the New Testament, the altar, the sacrifice, and the temple, all left in his charge, but also because he cared for them worthily and as a faithful servant. Matthew 24:45. Constituted by the Lord himself over his family to provide for all their necessities in the right time as a most faithful dispenser. Let all generations and peoples acknowledge and bless him. Let them extol his merits, since the Most High has favored none other in the same degree. I, an unworthy and poor worm, in the light of such venerable sacraments, exalt and magnify this Lord God, confessing him as holy, just, merciful, wise, and admirable in the disposition of all his great works. The humble but blessed house of Joseph contained 3 rooms, which occupied nearly all its space, and formed the exclusive dwelling place of the 2 spouses, for they kept neither a man nor a maidservant. In one of the rooms St. Joseph slept. In another he worked and kept the tools of his trade of carpentering. The third was ordinarily occupied by the Queen of Heaven and was also her sleeping room. It contained a couch made by the hands of Saint Joseph. This arrangement they had observed since their espousal, and from the day on which they had come to this their dwelling. Before knowing the dignity of his spouse and lady, Saint Joseph rarely went to see her, for while she kept her retirement he was engaged in his work, unless some affair made it absolutely necessary to consult her. But after he was informed of his good fortune, the holy man was more solicitous for her welfare, and in order to renew the joy of his heart, he began to come often to the retreat of the sovereign lady, visiting her and receiving her commands. But he always approached her with extreme humility and reverential fear, and before he spoke to her, he was careful to note in what she was engaged. Many times he saw her in ecstasy raised from the earth and resplendent with the most brilliant light. At other times, in the company of her angels, holding celestial intercourse with them, and at other times he found her prostrate upon the earth in the form of a cross, speaking to the Lord. Her most fortunate spouse was a participator in these favors, but whenever he found the great lady in these occupations and postures, he would presume no further than to look upon her with profound reverence, and thereby he merited sometimes to hear the sweetest harmony of the celestial music with which the angels regaled their queen, and perceived a wonderful fragrancy which comforted him and filled him entirely with jubilation and joy of spirit. The two holy spouses lived alone in their house, for, as I have said, they had no servants of any kind, not only on account of their humility, but in order more fittingly to hide from any witnesses the wonders which passed between them, and which were not to be communicated to outsiders. Likewise, the Princess of Heaven did not leave her dwelling except for very urgent causes in the service of God or her fellow man. Whenever anything was necessary, she asked that fortunate neighbor, who, as I have said, had served Saint Joseph during the absence of Mary in the house of Zacharias. This woman received such a good return from Mary that not only she herself became most holy and perfect, but her whole household and family was blessed by the help of the Queen and Mistress of the world. She was visited by Most Holy Mary in some of her sicknesses, and with her family was copiously enriched by the blessings of heaven. Never did Saint Joseph see his heavenly spouse asleep, nor did he, of his own experience, know whether she ever slept, although he besought her to take some rest, especially during the time of her sacred pregnancy. The resting place of the princess was the low couch which I said had been constructed by Saint Joseph, and on it were the coverings which served her during her brief and holy sleep. Her undergarment was a sort of tunic made of cotton, but softer than the ordinary or common cloth. This tunic she never changed from the time she left the temple, nor did it wear out or grow old or soiled, and no person ever saw it, nor did Saint Joseph know that she wore that kind of garment, for he never saw any other part of her clothing except the outside garments, which were open to the view of other persons. Those were of a gray color, as I have said, and these only, and her head coverings were the garments which the queen changed now and then, not because they were soiled, but because, being visible to all, she wished to avoid notice by such strange sameness of outward appearance. Nothing that she wore upon her most pure and virginal body became soiled or worn, for she neither perspired, nor was she subject to the punishments which are laid upon the sin-impregnated bodies of the children of Adam. She was in all respects more pure, and the works of her hands were like crystal ornaments, and with the same purity she cared for the clothes and other necessities of Saint Joseph. The food of which she partook was most limited in kind and quantity, but she partook of some every day, and in company of her spouse. She never ate meat, although he did, and she prepared it for him. Her sustenance was fruit, fishes, and ordinarily bread and cooked vegetables. But of all these she partook in exact measure and weight. Only so much was necessary for the nourishment of the body and the maintaining of the natural warmth, without any superfluities that could pass over into excess of harmful corruption. The same rule she observed in regard to drink, although her fervent acts of love often caused a superabundance of preternatural ardor. This rule, as to the quantity of her nourishment, she followed during her whole life, although as to the kind of food she adapted herself to the various circumstances demanding a change, and as I shall relate further on. In all things, the most pure Mary exhibited consummate perfection, without any fault or want of grace, and all her actions, both in the natural and the supernatural order, reached the pinnacle of excellence. But words fail me in describing it, for I am never satisfied, seeing how far short these words fall of that which I perceive, and how much more excellence this sublime creature possesses than I can express. Continually I am grieved by my insufficiency, and dissatisfied with my limited terms and descriptions, fearing lest I presume more than I should in striving to do that which so far exceeds my powers. But the force of obedience inspires me with I do not know what sweet strength, which dispels my hesitancy and impels my backwardness, encouraging me to face the greatness of my undertaking and the smallness of my ability. I work under obedience, and through it I hope to make great gains. It will also serve me as an excuse. Doesn't say what for, but instruction given me by the Queen of Heaven, Most Holy Mary. My daughter, in the school of humility which my whole life affords thee, I wish that thou be studious and diligent, and this should be thy first and principal care, if thou wishest to enjoy the sweet embraces of the Lord. Assure thyself of his favor, and possess the treasures of light which are hidden to the proud. Matthew 11:25. For without the trusty foundation of humility, such treasures cannot be confided to any man. Let all thy ambition be to humble thyself in thy own estimation and thought, so that in thy exterior actions thou mayest truly exhibit this humility of thy interior. It must be a subject of confusion and a spur of humility for thee and for all the souls to have the Lord as their Father and Spouse, to see that the presumption and pride of worldly wisdom is more powerful in its devotees than humility and true self-knowledge is in the children of light. Consider the watchfulness, the untiring study and care of ambitious and aspiring men. Look upon their struggle to be esteemed in the world, their strivings never at rest, though so vain and worthless, how they conduct themselves outwardly according to the false notions which they have of themselves, how they pretend to be what they are not, and how they exert themselves to obtain through these false pretenses the treasures which, though only earthly, they do not deserve. Hence it should be a cause of confusion and shame to the good that deceit should urge on the sons of perdition with greater force than truth urges the elect, that the number of those who in the world are anxious to strive in the service of their God and Creator should be so small in comparison with the number of those who serve vanity, that there should be so few of the elect, though all are called. Matthew 20:16. Seek, therefore, my daughter, to make progress in this science of humility, and to gain for thyself the palm of victory in this virtue in the midst of the children of darkness. In opposition to their pride, study what I did in order to overcome darkness in this world by the pursuit of humility. In this the Lord and I desire thee to be very wise and proficient. Never miss an occasion of exercising humility, and allow no one to deprive thee of such works. And if occasions of humility fail thee and are scarce, seek after them, and ask God to send them to you, for it pleases his majesty to see such kind of anxiety and ambition in what he desires so much. For the sake of this divine complacency alone, thou, as a daughter of his house, as his domestic and as his spouse, shouldest be solicitous and anxious for acts of humility, for in this human ambition itself will teach thee not to be negligent. Observe how a woman in her house and family conducts herself in order to benefit and advance her family, and how she loses no chance of advancing it. Nothing seems too much for her, and if anything, no matter how small it is, goes to loss, she becomes much excited. All this is the effect of worldly covetousness, and there is certainly no reason that the wisdom of heaven be less fruitful or less careful in the gifts received. Therefore I desire thee to allow no carelessness or forgetfulness concerning what so much concerns thee, and to lose no occasion of practicing humility and laboring for the glory of the Lord. But do thou seek and strive after his gifts, and draw merits from them as a faithful daughter and spouse. Then wilt thou find grace in the eyes of the Lord and in mine, according to thy desire. Some of the sayings and conversations of Most Holy Mary and Joseph regarding divine things, other wonderful events. Before Saint Joseph had been instructed in the mystery of the Incarnation, the Princess of Heaven made use of opportune occasions for reading to him some of the passages of Holy Scriptures, especially from the prophets and from the Psalms. As a most wise teacher, she also explained them to him, and her holy spouse, who was indeed capable of the exalted truths contained therein, asked her many questions, wondering at and consoling himself with the heavenly answers of his spouse. And thus both of them alternately praised and blessed the Lord. But after he had himself become instructed in the great sacrament, he conversed with our Queen, as with one who was herself to be the conjectrix of the admirable works and mysteries of our redemption. For now they could more openly and clearly discuss the divine prophecies and oracles concerning the conception of the Word through a Virgin Mother, of his birth, his bringing up, and his most holy life. All these things Her Highness discussed and explained, delineating beforehand the course of action which they were to pursue, when the longed-for day of the birth of the child should have arrived, when she should hold him in her arms, nourish him at her breast with virginal milk, and when the Holy Spouse himself should share in this greatest of mortal blessedness. Only of his passion and death, and of the sayings of Isaiah and Jeremiah, the most prudent queen spoke more rarely, for as her spouse was of a most kind and tender heart, she thought it best not to dilate upon or anticipate that which he himself remembered of the sayings of the ancient writers concerning the coming and the sufferings of the Messiah. The most prudent virgin also waited until the Lord should grant more particular revelation of what was to happen, or until she herself would know better the divine will in this respect. Her most faithful and blessed husband was wholly inflamed by her sweet words and conversations, and with tears of joy he said to the heavenly spouse, quote, "Is it possible that in thy most chaste arms I shall see my God and Redeemer, that I shall hear him speak and touch him, and that my eyes shall look upon his divine face, and that the sweat of my brow shall be so blessed as to be poured out in his service and for his sustenance, that he shall live with us, and that we shall eat with him at the same table, and that we shall speak and converse with him? Whence comes to me this good fortune which nobody can ever deserve? Oh, how much do I regret that I am so poor! Would I possess the richest palaces for his entertainment, and many treasures to offer him." Unquote. And the sovereign queen answered, quote, "My master and spouse, there is abundant reason that thy desires extend to all things possible for the reception of thy Creator, but this great God and Lord does not wish to enter into the world in the pomp of ostentatious riches and royal majesty. He has need of none of these." Psalms 15:2. Nor does he come from heaven for such vanities. He comes to redeem the world and to guide men on the path of eternal life. John 10:10. And this is to be done by means of humility and poverty. In these he wishes to be born, live, and die, in order to destroy in the hearts of men the fetters of covetousness and pride, which keep them from blessedness. On this account he chose our poor and humble house, and desired us not to be rich in apparent, deceitful, and transitory goods, which are but vanity of vanities and affliction of spirit, Ecclesiastes 1:24, and which oppress and obscure the understanding. Unquote. At other times the saint asked the most pure lady to teach him the nature and essence of virtues, especially of the love of God, in order that he might know how to behave toward the Most High, become man, and in order that he might not be rejected as a useless and incapable servant. The queen and teacher of virtues complied with these requests, and explained to him the nature of true virtues and the manner of exercising them in all perfection. But in these discourses she proceeded with so much humility and discretion that she did not appear as the teacher of her spouse, though such she was, but she managed to give her information under the guise of conversation, or in addressing the Lord, or at other times asking questions of Saint Joseph, which of themselves suggested the information. In all circumstances she knew how to preserve her most profound humility, without permitting even the least gesture not in accordance with it. These alternate discourses or readings from the Holy Scriptures they interpreted by manual labor as occasion. These alternate discourses or readings from the Holy Scriptures they interrupted by manual labor as occasion required. Not only was the hard and tiresome labor of Saint Joseph lightened by the admirable words of sympathy of Our Lady, But in her rare discretion she also knew how to add instruction, so that his manual labor became more an exercise of virtue than a work of the hands. The mildest dove, with the prudence of a most wise virgin, administered her consolations by pointing out the most blessed fruits of labor. In her estimation she held herself unworthy of being supported by her spouse, and she felt herself in continual debt to the sweat of Saint Joseph, as one who is receiving a great alms and most generous gift. All these considerations caused in her sentiments of deepest obligation, as if she were the most useless creature on earth. Therefore, though she could not assist the saint in his trade, since that was above the strength of women, and unbecoming the modesty and retirement of the heavenly Queen, yet in all that was befitting her, she served him as an humble handmaid, since her discreet humility and thankfulness would not suffer any less return for the faithful service of Saint Joseph. Among other wonderful happenings in connection with his intercourse with Most Holy Mary during these days of her pregnancy, Saint Joseph one day saw many birds flocking around her in order to pay their respect to the Queen and Mistress of all creatures. They surrounded her as if to form a choir, and raised up their voices in songs of sweet harmony, not less wonderful than their visit to the Heavenly Lady. Saint Joseph had never seen this wonder until that day, and full of admiration and joy, he said to his sovereign spouse, quote, "Is it possible, my mistress, that these simple birds and irrational creatures should understand and fulfill their obligations better than I? Surely it is reasonable that if they recognize, serve, and reverence thee according to their powers, that thou allow me to perform that which in duty I am bound to do." Unquote. The most pure Virgin answered him, quote, "My master, in the behavior of these little birds, the Creator offers us a powerful motive worthily to employ all our strength and faculties in his praise, just as they recognize and acknowledge their Creator in my womb. I, however, am but a creature, and therefore I deserve no veneration, nor is it right that I accept it. It is my duty to induce all creatures to praise the Most High, since he has looked upon me, his handmaid, and has enriched me with the treasures of the divinity." Unquote. Luke 1:48. It happened also not a few times that the Heavenly Lady and her spouse found themselves so poor and destitute of means that they were in want of the necessities of life, for they were most liberal in their gifts to the poor, and they were never anxious to store up beforehand food or clothing, as is wont with the children of this world in their faint-hearted covetousness. Matthew 6:25. The Lord so disposed things that the faith and patience of his most holy Mother and of Saint Joseph should not be vain, for this indigence was a source of incomparable consolation to Our Lady, not only because of her love of poverty, but also on account of her astonishing humility. She considered herself unworthy of the sustenance of life, and that she, above all others, should suffer the want of it. Therefore she blessed the Lord for this poverty as far as it affected her, while she asked the Most High to supply the needs of Saint Joseph, as being a just and holy man, and well worthy of this favor of the Almighty. The Lord did not forget his poor entirely, Psalms 73:19. For while he permitted them to exercise virtues and gain merits, he also gave them nourishment in opportune time, Psalms 144:15. This his providence provided in various ways. Sometimes he moved the hearts of their neighbors and acquaintances to bring some gratuitous gift or pay some debt. At other times, and more ordinarily, Saint Elizabeth sent them assistance from her home, for ever since she had harbored in her house the Queen of Heaven, this devoted matron insisted on sending them a gift from time to time, which the humble princess always acknowledged by sending in return some work of her hands. On some occasions, for the greater glory of the Most High, the Blessed Lady availed herself of the power given to her as the mistress of all creation. Then she would command the birds of the air to bring some fishes from the sea, or fruits of the field, and they would fulfill her commands to the point. Sometimes they would bring also bread in their beaks, which the Lord had furnished them. Many times the most fortunate spouse, Saint Joseph, was a witness to all these happenings. Wow. That is super neat. All in other necessities, they were in some occasions succored by the holy angels in an admirable manner. In order properly to understand some of the great miracles which happened through the ministry of the angels to Most Holy Mary and Joseph, it is necessary to take into account the magnanimity and generous faith of the saint. For these virtues were so great in him that not even the shadow of covetousness or greediness could find entrance into his soul. Although he labored for others, as did also his heavenly spouse, yet never did they ask for any wages, or set a price on their work, asking payment therefor. They performed all their work not for gain, but in obedience to a request or for charity, leaving the payment of wages entirely in the hands of their employers, and accepting it not as a just return for their labors, but as a freely given alms. This is the perfection of sanctity, which Saint Joseph learnt from the heavenly example given to him in his house by the Most Holy Virgin. Owing to this circumstance, that he was not paid for his work, it happened sometimes that they were in total want of food and sustenance until the Lord would provide for them. One day it came to pass that the hour set for their meal passed without having anything in the house to eat. They persevered in prayer until very late, giving thanks to the Lord for this privation and hoping that he would open his all-powerful hand. Psalms 144:16. In the meanwhile, the holy angels prepared the meal and placed upon the table some fruit and whitest bread and fishes, also especially a sort of preserve or jelly of wonderful and nourishing sweetness. Then some of the angels went to call their queen, and others called Saint Joseph her spouse. Each came forth from their separate retirement, and perceiving the regalement provided by heaven, they thanked the Most High in tears of fervent gratitude and partook of the food, and afterwards they broke out in exalted songs of praise of the Almighty. Many other similar events came to pass almost daily in the house of Most Holy Mary and her spouse. For as they were alone, and as there was no need of hiding these wonders from witnesses, the Lord did not hesitate to perform them for his beloved, who were entrusted with cooperation in the most wonderful of all the works of his powerful arm. I wish merely to remark that when I say Mary sang canticles of praise, either she by herself or in company with Saint Joseph or the holy angels, new songs are meant, such as Saint Anne sang, the mother of Samuel, or Moses, Ezekias, and other prophets, when they were visited by great blessings of the Lord. If all the canticles, Kings 2:1, Deuteronomy 32:1, etc., which the Queen of Heaven composed and sang would have been recorded, there would be a large volume of them, the contents of which would excite unheard of wonder in this world. Teaching vouchsafed me by the same Queen and Lady. Much beloved daughter, I wish that the science of the Lord be many times renewed in thee, and that thou acquire the knowledge of voice, wisdom 1:7. So that thou mayest know, and let also mortals know, the dangerous deceit and perverse estimation in which they, as lovers of falsehood, hold the temporal and visible goods. Psalms 4:4. How many men are not fascinated by their unbounded greed? All of them ordinarily stake their hopes on gold and material riches, and in order to increase them, they exert all the forces of their natural being. Thus they spend all the time of their life, which was given them in order to gain eternal rest and happiness in these vanities. They lose themselves in these dark labyrinths and mazes, as if they knew nothing of God and of his providence, for they do not think of asking him for that which they desire, and do not moderate their desires in such a way as will dispose them to ask and hope for what they desire at his hands. Thus they lose all, because they confide in the lying and deceitful prospects of their own efforts. This blind greed is the root of all evils. 1 Timothy 6:20. For the Lord, incensed at such great perversity, permits the mortals to be entangled in the vile slavery of avarice, in which their understanding is darkened and their will hardened. Soon the Most High, for greater punishment, withdraws his kindly care as from creatures so detestable, and denies them his paternal protection, thus letting them fall into what is the deepest misfortune that can befall man in this life. Although it is true that nothing can hide itself from the eyes of the Lord, Psalms 138:6, yet when the transgressors and enemies of this law offend him, they forfeit the kind attention and care of his providence and are left to their own desires. Psalms 80:13. They cease to experience the paternal foresight shown toward those who trust in the Lord. Those that confide in their own efforts and in the gold which they can touch and feel will reap the fruit of their hopes. But just as far as the divine essence and power is distant from the lowliness and limitation of mortals, so far also the results of human covetousness are distant from the help and protection of eternal providence shown to the humble who trust in it. Psalms 17:31. Upon these his majesty looks with kindest love, delights in them, nourishes them at his breast, and attends to their wishes and wants. I testify to that. I and my holy spouse Joseph were poor, and at times we suffered great wants, but none of them were powerful enough to engender within our hearts the contagion of avarice. We concerned ourselves entirely with the glory of the Most High, relying wholly on his most faithful and tender care. This was what pleased him so much, as thou hast understood and written, since he supplied our wants in various manners, even commanding the angels to help us and prepare for us our nourishment. I do not wish to say that the mortals should yield to laziness and negligence. On the contrary, it is just that all should labor. Psalms 48:7. And doing nothing is also a great and very reprehensible fault. Neither leisure nor solicitude must be disorderly, nor should the creature trust in his own strength, nor should he smother the divine love in anxiety, nor seek more than is necessary for a temperate life. Neither should he fear that the divine providence will fail to supply what is necessary, nor should he be troubled to lose hope when the Creator seems to delay his assistance. In the same way, he that is in abundance should not, Ecclesiastes 31:8, lay aside all exertion and forget that he is a man subject to labor and travail. Thus riches as well as poverty must be attributed to God and made use of in a holy and legitimate way for the glory of the Creator and rule of all things. If men would observe this rule of action, nobody would be without the assistance of the Lord, who is a true Father, and neither would the poor be led into sin by poverty, nor the rich by prosperity. Of thee, my daughter, I require the practice of these rules, and through thee I wish to inculcate them on other mortals. Thou must especially impress this doctrine upon all thy subjects, telling them not to be troubled or faint-hearted because of the wants they suffer, nor inordinately solicitous about their eating or clothing, Matthew 6:25, but that they confide in the Most High and in his providence. For if they correspond to his love, I assure them that they shall never suffer from the want of what is necessary. Amen, amen. Exhort them also to let their words and conversations continually turn about holy and divine things, engaging in the praise and exaltation of the Lord, according to the teachings of the Bible and holy writings. Let their conversations be in heaven, Philippians 3:20, with the Most High, and with me, who am their mother and superior, and let it be with the angels, imitating them in holy love. I'm going to continue reading until this video is an hour, since this is the 50th video. And until I get more views, I won't be able to post anymore. And so, please help me to spread these videos, get more views, so that I can continue to read the rest of the volumes. It'll probably take me 50 more videos to get through the rest of this, and I don't know, I think there's 4 of them. I don't know, it's going to take a while, but also I wanted to say that if you're a Catholic, look up a video on YouTube called Imposter Popes, and watch that and start to research about what's happened to the church. And if you would like to receive true sacraments from truly valid priests in the traditional Catholic rite, then go to the site. It's called CMRI, and it is traditional Catholic priests and bishops and nuns, and there's a directory. They have masses at different places around the country. You might have to drive some to get to them, but it's well worth it. And that's what I have to say about that. The Most Holy Mary prepares the swaddling clothes and the linens for the divine infant with ardent longings to see it born. The divine pregnancy of the Mother of the Eternal Word had already far advanced. Although she knew that the necessary coverings and linens for the time of her paturation must be provided, she wished to proceed in all things with the fullness of heavenly prudence. Therefore, fulfilling all requirements of an obedient and faithful handmaid, she presumed to arrange nothing without the permission and consent of the Lord and her holy spouse. Although she could have acted for herself in such matters as pertain to her office of chosen mother and of her most holy Son, she would not undertake anything without speaking to Saint Joseph. Therefore she said to him, quote, "My master, it is time that we prepare the things necessary for the birth of my most holy Son. Although his majesty wishes to be treated as one of the children of men, humiliating himself and suffering with them, yet it is just that we acknowledge him as our God and as our true King and Lord by rendering him our devoted service, and by making careful provisions for his wants as an infant. If thou give me permission, I will begin to prepare the coverings and linens for his protection and shelter. I have already woven with my own hands a piece of linen which may serve as his first swaddling clothes. And do thou, my master, seek to procure some woolen cloth of a soft texture and an humble color from which I may prepare other coverings, and later on I will weave a seamless tunic appropriate for him. In order to avoid any mistake, let us offer special prayers, asking His Highness to govern and direct us in the right way, so that we may know His will and fulfill His pleasure." Unquote. Quote, "My spouse and lady," answered Saint Joseph, "if it were possible to serve with my own heart blood my Lord and God, and thus fulfill thy commands, I would be willing to shed it amid most atrocious torments,